I'm so excited to introduce our next panel. Our moderator for the next panel is Bill Strong from the Gwendolyn Strong Foundation. He's the co-founder of the Santa Barbara-based all-volunteer nonprofit organization that focuses on increasing global awareness of spinal muscular atrophy, which is the #1 genetic killer of young children, accelerating research focused on ending this cruel disease and supporting families impacted by SMA and other life-altering conditions. He's also a CPA. I am going to just go ahead and turn it over to you to get started.
Good morning. I'm actually going to step down if you don't mind. I'm a little more comfortable down there. My name's Bill Strong. I'm very excited to be here. I think that what Global Genes is doing here is just incredible. To start with that first session, I thought that was so needed. I mean, just on a personal level. To be in a room full of people who are going through the same thing and understand one another. Maybe our diseases are so different, but there's a lot of commonality. I think one of the things that Global Genes does so well is, there are so many different diseases that fall under, this rare disease umbrella. But there truly is commonality at some level amongst what we're doing. And from nonprofits, working together on some level just makes sense. And I don't think there's anyone in this room that would argue that, if we're working together towards some common goal, whether it's on research that, can have some aspects that work together amongst diseases or legislation or advocacy or support groups or what have you, we're all going to accomplish more that way. It doesn't necessarily mean we all have to be doing it together, everything together, but I think, being open to collaborating, obviously is a good thing. To be honest, I don't consider myself an expert in any nonprofit or any field like that. I'm just a dad who's loves his daughter very, very much and has found himself, along with my wife, kind of in the trenches battling a disease we never knew existed. I guess I'll just introduce you to my daughter. This is really why I'm here. This is Gwendolyn. I think stepping back, she's just awesome. She's 6 years old today. She was diagnosed with a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, about 5.5 years ago. And SMA, the easiest way to describe it is it's like ALS Lou Gehrig's, but in babies. It's brutal, and like a lot of us in this room can understand, it has given my daughter a lot of challenges, but she's incredible. She fights every single day of her life, and through the work that we do through our nonprofit, it's one of the ways that we have been able to kind of fight back. So this quote, I'll never forget the moment when we sat in front of that diagnosing doctor in 2008, and he said, "I'm sorry. There's nothing, take your baby home and love her. There's nothing you can do." And I underline the nothing because I think that really lit the fire under my wife and I for many reasons. Obviously, we were going to take our daughter home and love her and give her the best quality of life possible. But what that's done, what it did is, we're 6 years later, and we're lucky to have, we know every single day we're lucky to have my daughter here with us. She's, pretty much an outlier living with this disease. And she's in first grade. She goes to a standard first grade school, and she loves all the things that all 6-year-olds love. She loves princesses and Disneyland and giving me a hard time, and she's just incredible. But I think what that nothing did for us is it really lit a fire under us to do something that was so defeating for us to leave that doctor's office and really be told there's nothing we can do. And maybe clinically that may be true, and maybe the prognosis for my daughter is she'll die from this disease. But what we've learned over the last 6 years is there's a lot that we can actually do. And whether that time was going to be 2 weeks with my daughter, or 6 years, or 60 years, I have no clue. We've learned that there is a lot that we can be doing. So we focus, like probably most of the organizations, on support groups for our disease community, on legislation, and on research. But really, my wife and I thought long and hard in the beginning about whether or not we wanted to actually start a nonprofit. Our disease community maybe is a little different from some here. The disease has been around for quite a while. There's been research going on for 20 years. There are a couple of larger organizations that already existed. But when we looked at the landscape, after my daughter was diagnosed, we really felt that there was something missing that we could add to the mix. And that's the biggest question in hindsight that I think we asked when we decided to make that jump and start an organization. And we continue to ask almost, I would say, on a weekly basis is, how will our existence enhance the current ecosystem in our disease community? And for us, that specifically was a branded message. So I'm sure that you guys can all relate. These diseases are very complex, and it's really hard to describe them to anyone in a 1-minute conversation without their eyes glossing over. So we really wanted to bring kind of branded messaging. Never give up is our messaging that we run with. And obviously it has nothing to do with SMA. You have no clue what it even means. But the whole point was to bring people outside of the community in and to learn more about what we're doing. And we do that using technology and social media and really through motivation and inspiration. So we share a very honest story about the disease, but there's so many incredible positive stories going on. We don't want to hide the true reality and the prognosis and the fact that we're losing children every day to this disease, but there's a way of sharing that, we felt, in a very positive, motivating way. So what we did is we did branded message using technology, social media, motivation, and inspiration to draw people outside of the community into the community. And really it was to enhance what was already going on. We weren't going to reinvent the wheel. Our organization still today is my wife and me. We have nobody else. There's no volunteers, there's no salaries. Every single thing we do, every single thing we execute is done by the two of us. So we knew we couldn't do it all. We can't be superheroes. And there was already an existing ecosystem in place, so we wanted to make sure that what we were doing was just enhancing that. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to John Stone, who's with the Child Neurology Foundation, and we're really excited about getting the panel started.
Hi, I am the Executive Director of the Child Neurology Foundation, and we represent the 1,700 docs that each try to take care of 10,000 kids with a neurologic disorder, making for very tired docs. But we need to figure out ways of extending their expertise, and that's part of the reason that the Child Neurology Foundation exists. We are here really to help you. There are over 400 neurologic disorders. Nearly all of those are rare. This first slide is to share with you two conspirators caught in the act of collaborating. At least in the case of the smallest dog there, I'm pretty sure that without collaborating, it would not have gotten to those hamburgers. And what's this one? Okay. In order for, I'm here to share a few examples of collaboration lessons that I've learned over the years. And one of the main ones is that it's impossible to collaborate unless you're rowing in the same direction. About 8 years ago, I had the opportunity, I was brought in as a consultant for a small community foundation to pull together the 60 or so individuals, probably a couple of dozen organizations that were recipients of their foundation awards. And the idea was to walk them through the process of how to collaborate better themselves to increase the impact of the grants that they received. And the good news was that when the day came, I was ready to do a 6-hour full day session with breakout groups and exercises and so on. But when I got there, 60 people showed up. That was the good news. The bad news was that by and large, I discovered just by talking with people at the beginning that they weren't really there to collaborate. They were there to please the community foundation and to protect their turf and to make sure that they would get their piece of the pie. And I realized that the next 6 hours of activities that I had planned were for naught. I was ready to share a how-to, and they weren't ready to say, why should we? So anyway, I changed the focus, and instead of using my slide deck and so on, I decided to expand my ice-breaking opening session and gave them the task of saying, okay, at some point in your life, in your career, you were at a low point and you needed a break. Other people didn't believe in you and you didn't believe in yourself. Someone, though, stepped up and gave you the encouragement and the support to take a next step. And I want you to share that story and talk about that person, what they did for you, and how it changed your life. It was a long session. There were 60 people in the room. So about an hour into the sharing of the stories, where people were sharing meaningful stories, sharing stories that they had never shared ever with anybody, tears were shed, and one guy, about a third of the way through, said, okay, I get why we're doing this. You actually want us to care about each other. And I said, you're right, let's continue. And he shared his story, and we had 60 wonderful stories. And at the end of it, people started saying, you know, I didn't know that about you, Frank. Nancy, this is all brand new to me. And they did. And at the break time, where it was supposed to be a 15-minute break, not unlike what we just had, it ended up being a 45-minute break because people were connecting each other, some for the very first time, some getting over animosities that had accrued over the years and so forth. Kind of the point here is that collaboration, a prerequisite for collaboration is trust. And sometimes you have to back up before you try to put a square peg in a round hole. Sometimes you need to take the time actually to really get to know folks. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, next slide. This is the economies of scale. A lot of the organizations that are represented in this room are small. The Child Neurology Foundation is small. About a year ago, we had the fruition of talks that had been going on for a few years with the American Academy of Neurology, an organization which is at least 10 times larger than the Child Neurology Foundation. And we had discussed the possibility of co-locating with them and them providing an administrative collaboration where they provided us the space, IT, HR, and finance. And what that allowed for us to do is to quit trying to come up with the expertise of all that with a very small organization, and to be able to give us the breathing room necessary so that we could really focus on fulfilling our mission. And so I just wanted to bring that up. Collaborating sometimes with a large organization makes a whole lot of sense. In this case, it sure did for us. And if that opportunity arises, don't be afraid to take advantage of that. And again, you need to build it on trust. But as it happened, I had already had 4 years of friendship that was built with Kathy Rydell, the executive director of the Child Neurology Foundation, had convinced her to be on our board, and it kind of resulted from there. Okay. All right. Slide 4, collaboration leads to new revenue. Nearly all nonprofits, at one time or another, suffer from the mistake of becoming too dependent on last year's donors. And you get into a rut and maybe complacent, or you trust things a little bit too much that they're always going to stay the same, and it ends up biting you. About 25 years ago, we experienced this and overcame it. I was with the St. Paul Urban League in Minnesota, and we were in a closed, very competitive environment. There were only a couple of dozen vendors that were providing services for out of poverty and job placement programs. And there was a big problem. The city of St. Paul, where we got our funds, were stuck with the past getting their funding always from the same source. And the requirements or the eligibility for the programs that we provided did not allow for men to receive services. So it was, back then, it was primarily women on AFDC, and there were all kinds of problems with the focus of trying to get mothers back to work, which I didn't agree with. But the bigger problem was that we were turning people away. And we figured out that if we collaborated, we had the infrastructure, we had the services and the expertise. If we collaborated among 6 different organizations, that we would be able to provide services for everybody if we only had the money. And that building that collaboration, instead of competing one at a time, we collaborated 6 at a time, and were able to go after a different pot of money. And it allowed us to provide services and eliminate the eligibility restrictions, and allowed us to double the success rate of that program overnight. Kind of the point here is that there's more than one well, and sometimes if you collaborate, you can find brand new opportunities for funding. Sparingly, and I say this kind of out of self-care, join networking organizations. I think that if you've got several people that you're working with, you can do much more of this. But I think in order to get the 10,000-foot view, which is what the right part is supposed to represent, you can connect with service organizations like Rotary. You can connect with professional organizations like the Association for Fundraising Professionals. You can connect with common cause organizations like the one that's hosting us today. And that allows you to have a different perspective than just focusing on the day-to-day, one step in front of the other kind of arrangement that it's very easy to get involved with. And finally, the work for win-win, multiple win collaborations. If you're not already involved in an event that involves many people, think about joining it or starting it yourself. It's incredibly life-giving. You get to work with great people that care about the same things you do. In our case, last year we had what we called the Young Brain Carnival that brought together a dozen organizations, all advocacy organizations, big and small, and supported by dozens of for-profit organizations. And it was all held at the Mall of America. It was a great win for the families and the kids that day. They had a great time. It was a carnival, free games and so on. It was a great win for CNF because we got better visibility in our community that is in our backyard. It was a great win for the advocacy organizations in the area. It was great just to have that connection and talking to folks. And it was a big win for the Mall of America as well as the businesses there because we brought them lots of traffic. So if you're not already part of something like that, think about joining it. We're also here to support you. So if we can help in any way coming to you, we're open to doing that as well. Thank you.
All right, good morning, Global Genes. No, come on. This is a room full of passionate, persistent patient advocates. I know we can do better. Good morning, Global Genes. Okay, I'm going to start off with 2 very difficult questions for you. Got to get thinking here. So raise your hand if you are a parent or someone suffering from a rare disease. Okay, second one here, this is going to be even harder, and I want you to stand up if you answer to this. Please stand up if you remember the day that you got the diagnosis. And that's what I want to talk quickly about. And you can have a seat here. I'm going to share very briefly our diagnosis story, but I want you to think about your story because everybody has that story. And for us, we actually got the diagnosis on my 30th birthday. So there we were, my 30th birthday, we were in the hospital, and it was a teaching hospital. So what that meant is we were sitting around a boardroom table with about 12 or 15 doctors, nurses, residents, all learning how to tell a family that they got a genetic diagnosis. And I remember sitting there, and I heard the doctor to my left say, well, your son has Prader-Willi syndrome. I said, okay, what does that mean? And he said, well, his growth is going to be delayed, his speech is going to be delayed, he's never going to be able to have children, and he is literally always going to be hungry. And to my right, I heard my wife, Tanya, start to cry, and I was trying to make sense of it, and I turned to the doctor and I said, what about his cognitive abilities? And he said, you know what? Those are going to be delayed as well. And so that was our introduction to Prader-Willi syndrome. And I'll tell you the rest of the story a little bit later, but the reason I'm telling you is because that story, your story, is what I would say is the only thing that is going to cut through making those collaborations. Because we all know there's a lot of politics, there's going to be a lot of personal issues, there's going to be territorial, there's going to be confusion in terms of what we're doing. But the one thing, when you know yourself and you can sit down in front of the other organization, the other individual, the other doctor, and they say, the reason I'm here is because of my son, my daughter, myself with a genetic disorder, that is the only thing that is going to cut through all of the confusion. So after that, moves on to the next thing. Well, what are you here for? What's your mission? And I can tell you, we sat down from our non-profit point of view with other nonprofits, and even from the for-profit point of view with other groups that we're trying to do partnership deals with. And it's amazing, or frustrating sometimes, how not clear those missions are. And you'll read mission statements that are like a whole paragraph written by a community. And then you go to see something like TED that it says, ideas worth spreading. And they have a very clear focus of what they're doing. And it tells you what you want to do, but it also tells the other groups, this is why we're here. If it doesn't make sense, then we're not going to work together. So our focus at the foundation is to eliminate the challenges of Prader-Willi syndrome through research. So that tells us we focus on research. It also tells us we don't focus on building group homes. We don't focus on some of the other support ideas that are out there. So if there's a group that's focusing on that and we can work together, that's great because now they know what we're going to do and our messaging relates to that. And they, in turn, actually know what we're actually going to do as well. And I always say here, outside of the mission, you have to go the next step and know what are you going to do this year. So we'll sit down with groups and partner, and the first thing we say is, what are you planning to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because a lot of times you'll get two groups that get together and say, oh, great, we have a similar objective, let's partner, but they don't know, are you going out to fund a research project this year? Are you going out to build a registry? Are you focusing on building a group home? If you don't know that, then you can't successfully partner with another group. And this is important, I think our last presenter was talking about that. It is not a zero-sum game. Anybody know what I mean when I say zero-sum game? What does it mean? Zero-sum?
It means that if you, a zero-sum game means that if you, that you're not taking anything away from the other person by succeeding, that you're both raising, that there's not just a limited amount of whatever it is you're trying to do.
Perfect. Round of applause for Wendy. And so many times when you meet with groups, they will say, well, if we partner, then all of a sudden you're going to take money away from my donors, or we're going to take money away from you. And what I can tell you from experience in our organization, and I've seen it around, it is not a zero-sum game. If you do it properly, you can actually grow the pie for everybody. And that's important, because I always say, I actually don't care about the organization. I don't care about the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research. I don't care about any organizations. Those are vehicles that we need to achieve what we're setting out to achieve. And this comes back to your child's diagnosis story. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And if there's a way to accomplish that, then we're going to do it. The organizations come second. Let's put the structure in place to do what we actually want to do. And that all comes back to knowing what you want. So you take the mission, but then you take it down to the next level. Like I said, are you going to go ahead and build a group home this year? Are you going to build a registry? Are you going to fund research? Are you going to do something else? But the caveat to that is you also have to make sure you know what the other group wants. And I can tell you, we've sat down in partnership meetings where two groups will sit down and say, great, we have the similar objective, we have a similar plan, you guys are going to make us better. And then they do the partnership. Fast forward a year or two later, and all that's happened is you have two logos on the website saying that we're going to work together. Because you never really understood what it is that you want to do, and more importantly, you didn't understand what the other group wanted from you. Because if there's a true partnership, you should have very clear, this is why we're doing it. Is it to increase donors? Is it to increase access? Is it to give the infrastructure so that we can scale? And the other group needs to know that from you. And that's what's going to lead to a successful partnership. So what I'd also like to say, and we've heard this before, is do not recreate the wheel. Especially for our groups where we're rare patients, rare groups. If you can find a situation where you can leverage another group, do that. We have a lot of groups that will start and say, hey, we're going to start a 501(c)(3), we're going to start an organization, and that's the first step. What I can tell you from my experience, that's got to be the second, third, fourth, fifth step. If there's a group that you can work with to leverage, then go ahead and do that. That's the fastest way to get to the end result, and that's what we're here for. It's not about the organizations. But the caveat to that is unless you can make a better wheel. And for me, the point tells you is that each of us do have skills and expertise that we're bringing to this environment. And I think this is what we were talking about at the beginning. If you can look there and say, you know what, our group, me as a person, our family, there's something that we can add, we can make a better wheel in this situation, then go ahead and do that. And I'd actually like to ask Susan Hedstrom to stand up here. So it's because Susan Hedstrom, as what a lot of you say is, just a rare mom. She came to our conference a couple years ago with, those great big eyes, just getting the diagnosis, knowing no idea what I'm going to do, and my life is over. And what I can tell you now is through Susan's work, we were able to create this One Small Step walkathon that we actually now run in 72 different cities across 7 different countries. And I can tell you that Susan here, from her kitchen table, 7 months pregnant, was raised over $1 million through using her talents to do that. So congratulations, Susan. So once you figure out where your part is, what wheel that you can create, make sure you share that back to the community. And the last thought I'd like to leave you with, so you have a couple numbers here. I'd like to start with $500. And the question to you is, could you, as an individual, raise $500? Raise your hand. $500, could you go ahead and find some magical, mystical way to raise $500? So the next point that I would make is, as a rare community, if you look at all the people that are touched with rare genes across the US, if everybody just did that, $500, we would raise over $15 billion in 1 year. That is 4 times the Office of Rare Disease Research's budget. That's half of the whole NIH budget. If each person related to a rare disease raised $500. And that answer, that solution is here. The families, you are the ones that are going to lead the change, and we can do it if we work together smartly. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now I'll tell you how to make that into $500 billion. No. I'm Sue Kahn. I'm with the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Disease Association, and we started up in 1957, so we're one of the oldest organizations, and we support families affected by Tay-Sachs, Canavan, GM1, other related diseases, and also advanced research. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and it draws on, I've been doing this for about 6 years, and I want to thank all the people that have really helped me in this position, and some of what they've taught me I'm going to share with you, as well as it draws on my corporate background in business development, so it's kind of in my DNA to think about collaborating, which is also really helpful. So I didn't have all the pictures. I didn't get the message. Like, it was just supposed to be photos, so I have some words. But I really think I'm going to be able to draw on what everybody here said today. And so by the end of this, hopefully you'll have some really great ideas. So first of all, okay, I do have a picture. We have some new brochures, and this is one of our families. They actually live in the San Diego area. Gavin's affected by juvenile Tay-Sachs, and here's his sister Aubrey and his mom Jan and his dad Ferdinand. So, and I'm really here on behalf of this family and so many families really all over the world that have kids affected by an infantile form of disease or juvenile, or also adults. So just wanted you to be thinking of these beautiful people here too. So first of all, and this again really draws on what people have said, when you think about partnering, why would you not? Which are both questions. This is part of what if you want. So I think the way I think about it in terms of, we have a pretty broad mission. It's about family support, it's about research, education, it's a lot of diseases. What can we do uniquely? Well, no one else is offering family support for Tay-Sachs disease, for example. So that's something we can really bring to the table. But when it comes to things like education, and we talk about carrier screening, well, back in the 1970s and 80s, that's what we did. That's what NTSD, where they led. But now it's in the medical guidelines. There's organizations like the Victor Center, the Jewish Genetic Disease Consortium that are out there. That's their primary mission. So we're leveraging off of their work. We want to also have a lot of the knowledge, but we're going to benefit from them spending the time doing it. Same thing in research. Some people say, oh, I just want to raise money just for Tay-Sachs. But we know that a treatment for any of these diseases might not come from research on our specific disease. So we really have to think about it more broadly. We've funded programs with other medical research foundations. A number of years ago, there was a program that actually Jane Gershkowitz, when she was at NTSD, where she helped start with the National MPS Society and NINDS, and they collaborated to fund research. So in areas where, which is really the second point, where you want to be present, but you don't have all the expertise, and you shouldn't think that you need to have it all, who else is out there? Again, what's the landscape? And then sometimes you just refer people. So maybe 20 years ago, people were calling us about Fabry disease and Gaucher disease. But now there's organizations out there where there's experts. So we say, if they call us about Fabry disease, call Jack Johnson, or for Gaucher, call Rhonda Byers. So I think that's part of knowing what you want and where you're going to focus on and where you're not. And things change over time, like the example I gave you about carrier screening. At one point, that was our lead. That was what we did. But now there are others out there. We can really leverage off of that. And in the make it easy for partner to partner with you, I think part of that is knowing what you want to be able to articulate it. So another topic that I want to talk about, just because this was thinking about how do you partner with industry. When I talk about industry, I'm really talking about rare disease focus. I'm not talking about Home Depot, Walmart. That's like a whole other thing. So first of all, they want to learn from you. You're the expert. And this was, again, relates to Keegan's thing about you can tell the story. And I didn't just make this up, but I actually, as part of our research strategy process, I've been talking to a lot of people, both scientists as well as people in industry. And one of the questions was, okay, how can NTSD help to advance the work towards treatments? Where are the barriers? What can we do? And a few people said to me exactly what this is. You're the expert. You know the most about the patient experience. Who are the doctors? Who are the scientists? Can you give me a document that lays out what are all the published papers, which you go on to PubMed, you can do. You can work with the scientists. You can put that together so that you can be the expert. And you know more than you think you know. So, and reach out to others. If this sounds overwhelming, reach out to others who, a scientist or a doctor who could help you do this. And then you're really armed when you go to talk to someone and you can show, and they want to learn from you. They don't have this knowledge. So you really bring a lot to the plate, and that way you can also find out. They might say, well, you know what? This isn't really our area of interest, but I know so-and-so at this other place who you can talk to. And then in getting that conversation going, you can learn from them, because then they're thinking about, oh, okay, well, we have this certain technology approach, and we think maybe some of the work that's been done in your disease goes with it. So you can learn about what they're doing and what the scientists are. In clinical trials, they may be thinking about, well, how do we design a trial? What's it like for a patient to have to travel to go to a clinical trial? They can learn from you about, or you can learn from them, and it's really, again, the two-way street. Don't think of it as, oh, I need to go to them so that they can do something for me. It's definitely two-way. They need you as much as you need them. And last point here, it helps, but you don't have to have a therapy to have industry partners. I think it goes, again, back to what are your common goals? And if you can articulate what yours are, you can get the dialogue going by being the expert. You might find that you have common goals. Also, there's multiple touch points, particularly in a larger company. My primary contacts are mainly through patient advocacy, but you can also meet people in the educational, the medical area, research, and while you want to keep your main contact informed patient advocacy, it doesn't hurt to have these other contacts so that if they read something that they think might be of interest to you, they can contact you and not have to go through, the whole circle. So in terms of an example, and the next slide is gonna have a lot of details on it. The point isn't really, you won't have to read all of them, but just to show you that, there's a lot of words, don't try to read it. But, so NTSAD has had a collaboration with Genzyme that started way before me, and over 20 years, and it all started out of that NTSAD was working closely with the Ashkenazi Jewish community because of their leadership and carrier screening, and knew the issues, the organizations, knew about carrier testing. And when Genzyme got into Gaucher disease, and they knew that had relatively high prevalence in the Ashkenazi Jewish community, they wanted to learn about making connections into that community. So they came to NTSAD, and that led to a number of collaborative education programs. And since then, it's been a very dynamic relationship, because we've just kept it evolving to say, okay, what do you want to do around leadership in rare diseases, and we wanted to be able to bring new scientists in, so they would help sponsor science symposiums. So there's a lot of things listed here, but my point, and there are no treatments. We hope that there will be, but there are none. So it's not a requirement for starting out the discussion, is really what my point is, and there's still a lot of kinds of different things that you can do. And my last comment, 2 years ago, and we submitted an application for a Patient Advocacy Leadership Grant Award for a project, because we wanted to be able to develop a resource for our families that would be, how do you cope with a diagnosis? How do you find support? What are the issues in the marriage? How do you involve your family? What are other issues that you might deal with along the way? And so we got NTSAD, you got funding to develop this video resource and a guide, and then we realized, oh, you know what? These issues are not really just for our families. This could be for any family, where it's called parenting a child with a life-limiting illness. And then we found out in talking to people, physicians, ER docs, people that work in pediatric hospice, pediatric palliative care, like, oh, wow, I could really learn something, because now I can really understand something from the family perspective. So out of this one thing that we started developing for our own families, it's really, we're partnering now to go way beyond what we ourselves, because our mission isn't to help anybody out there understand this, but by partnering, we can still make this available to anybody who would benefit from this. So we developed a toolkit for our families to go out in their communities, to talk to their doctors, to talk to their friends about this. We've had a film screening. We had 70 professionals at Genzyme Center who listened to talks and watched the film and have had discussions about it. We're piloting a program with UCSF around this film. And we also worked with Global Genes, and they actually, we sent them a copy, and they said, wow, this would be a great thing for a toolkit. They have taken it beyond, and now there's questions about financial issues and other kinds of resources. And I don't know if there were copies on the table. I'm not sure if they're still there, but it's an online resource. And I just want to say, I have like 10 copies with me, so if anybody would want them for themselves, think it would be helpful, I'd only ask just to get your contact information, because we do want to follow up to see if it's a resource, but we can send you them later. It's free for families and a small charge for professionals, and it's also available online. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I think one thing also that I just wanted to add as I was listening to the presentations is, especially for the smaller nonprofits, at least looking back on our journey, is never lose sight of why you started it in the first place, and never let any of the fractured politics or things you may come up against or doors that may close or what have you. Never, I think, to kind of Keegan's point, never lose sight of that story, that what drove you, that fire to light inside of you. I think that's really important. Well, we had a question coming in from Twitter that I think is important from Jen. It says, how do we do any of this, though, when we're essentially undiagnosed? Where do we turn? How do we help? How do we get help? Any experiences you can share?
There are organizations for undiagnosed families. One is Syndromes Without a Name. I am the founder and president of Syndromes Without a Name, inspiring hope for the undiagnosed. Brochures are out there.
Great.
And there is another one called You Are Our Hope. It's founded in Austin, Texas, and we also support families with undiagnosed children. I had a son that passed away at the age of 5, and he's still undiagnosed. So, Mr. Keegan, I live for the day where I can say, I know what my son had. But that day may never come, but every day that's what I strive to do, is to help families, have better tools to get a diagnosis. So.
And if I can jump in there. I think that's a beautiful story, and I think that is your story, and that's the thing that's going to touch all the other people. And when the question came in from Twitter, I don't know offhand the number of people that are diagnosed, but that's got to be a huge number. And that's kind of the seeds of that movement, right? And that's that story saying we are undiagnosed, we need an answer. And a community, a collaborative community, can really be built around that simple message, because we need to find those answers. And that's your story, and you can drive, the two of you can drive that message.
Just to give you a little update on what we're doing at NIH, and actually you had a question about how many people are undiagnosed. In our information center, approximately 6% of the calls that we get and emails are from patients who did not have a diagnosis. So it's a large number, tremendously large number. So about 4 years ago, we started a pilot program at NIH called the Undiagnosed Diseases Program. Bill Gall is the director of the program, and he has a very nice and wonderful staff that spend many, many hours pouring through the information that's provided. So this is a program that you can apply to, and hopefully, if you're accepted, be brought back to the NIH. I just want to mention that recently there was a funding opportunity announcement that was released to increase the centers in the extramural program, not at the NIH Clinical Center, but we will continue the Clinical Center program and add 6 additional sites throughout the country. The applications have come in and the review is ongoing. So at some point soon in the future, we hope to have those results and make them available to everyone to gain access to additional centers. And we think if everything works well, that in years to come, you'll see more and more locations offering clinics that can help obtain the diagnosis that everyone is seeking. So that's our goal, sort of a spider web. You have to start somewhere, get that spider working, and have the web increase. And we're starting to see it. It's taken us 4 or 5 years, but I think we'll see it continuing to grow. And a big part of this is training the molecular diagnosticians that are going to be needed to look at the results of the gene sequencing and the sequencing of individuals to really come up with that diagnosis. And this is all, we now have the opportunity to expand these services and increase the knowledge base that people can begin to act and draw the conclusions more readily. So that's what we're looking at, and it's great.
Thank you. We're going to take a couple more questions, but just a show of hands, how many of you actually run nonprofits now? And how many are thinking about doing it? Okay, just curious. A couple questions for the panel?
Just wanted to say one more thing about the diagnosis. Am I being obvious if I talk about the West test? Does everybody know about that? Okay. My son was diagnosed last year with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, very rare. There's only 200 people in the world who have it. And we got our answer not from a microarray, which we did, not from a fish, which we did, not from a muscle biopsy, but from the West. It's whole exome sequencing. And anybody who contacts our group looking for a diagnosis, I tell them to pursue this. And even though it's only been a small number, I can count on one hand, they've all gotten answers from the West. What's weird is some doctors refuse to do it. I don't know why, but I just wanted to say that our doctor at UCLA, Stanley Nelson, he's a dad of a boy with muscular dystrophy, and he is just dedicated to helping people find their diagnosis. So if even if you don't live in Los Angeles, call UCLA, call Stanley Nelson, ask for the whole exome sequencing. And if your doctor, where you are, for some reason doesn't want to do it, call another one. Oh, you will? I won't, but...
Thanks. My name is Badri Rangarajan. I'm president of the board of the International Pemphigus and Pemphigoid Foundation. I think partnering with industry makes a lot of sense. There could be a lot of benefit from it. But what I'm curious about is when a nonprofit or foundation organization has spent a lot of effort and time and resources to, let's say, put together a registry, a Rolodex of patients, and so forth. And now you're doing things that will help the clinical trialist at the pharma company recruit patients, understand the disease better, and so forth. There's some sentiment I've heard that, well, is there some way we can get compensated for all the work, time, effort that's been put in? I mean, clearly there's a benefit of getting a therapy produced. I don't dispute that. But is there some kind of fair exchange, if you will, that can occur in that interaction?
So, my answer would be yes, but it does depend on the situation. I don't think you can have a blanket thing. So, when we're doing research, when we're funding research, we have IP clauses in the research that we're doing to say as we start to find answers, we're going to benefit based on the results of that proportionately to the funding that we're doing for it. So you can, not in all cases, but you can put those agreements in place. So I think you need to look at it and say, this is actually a business arrangement that you're putting in place with a partner. So if you have a research group that you're going to now pass all that information on to, there's nothing wrong with actually having that conversation and saying, this is what we want to put in place. At the same time, what you look at it is our big advantage is we actually want the answer. And if you look at it and say, if these guys made $1 billion and I had the answer for my son with no money, do I actually want that? And maybe yes, maybe no, it doesn't really matter, but you have to really understand going into that negotiation what it is you want. Secondly, I think it's also a function of how prepared you are. So if you're now working with industry, and you've already built up the industry. And there's groups that are doing this that are already in place. You already have the contacts. You're already doing it. You're in a much better negotiating position to have that negotiation than we're just getting at the beginning. They've already got their drug going, and you're just sort of tagging along at the end.
There's a lot of different thoughts on this. I mean, one of the things that you talk about, first of all, is I look at what you're doing is funding clinical trial infrastructure. So if you're getting together natural histories, registries, all that, anybody can work on that. So, I mean, it's not company specific. So in a way, if your mission is to get treatments, by you doing this, you're really getting to your mission. You're enabling not just one company, you're enabling who knows how many people to work on it. So I think, so that's one thing I think about in terms of natural history kind of work. If instead you're funding, let's say, a very specific discovery, there's going to be a new molecule or something, and there's going to be intellectual property, I think that kind of thing maybe more lends itself to some kind of agreement where then you might do some licensing fee, because maybe part of it goes back into research. But at the end of the day, I mean, my thought, what I always say is, we're trying to get a treatment, and so, but I think particularly on the clinical trial piece, I'm not sure as much about the monetary piece. I think that's totally enabling, and that's what we should all be doing.
Hi, thanks. So we've alluded a lot to some of the political and personality conflicts that get in the way of collaboration. And my question is, how do you get that conversation started? How do you get to sharing the story when there are legal, copyright, other, significant barriers to actually talking to each other?
You mean like foundation to foundation? I mean, for us, it's always been, after my daughter was diagnosed, it was, okay, how can we help in any way? And we literally went nuts, just learning the landscape of what was existing. And we learned about what each organization needed. And then what we tried to do is we would come to them with, the landscape in our disease community is fractured. They've been around for a long time, but we tried to bring something to the table that was giving them, a solution to a problem that they were looking to solve. Not just, hey, I'm just here. How can I help? They get that a lot, and that's needed for sure. But for us, we really tried to say, okay, here's a piece of legislation that's working its way through Congress. I have zero experience in that, but what do you need? You need co-sponsors. Okay. Well, I have a technology background. Have you done an online petition? No. Great. Let's get that started. And let's blanket the world with online advertisements to drive in what was 100,000 signatures in I think a month to drive co-sponsors to that bill. And then we presented the data to Congress, and that moved the legislation forward. So I think that's really important to bring solutions to maybe their problems. I don't think not everyone's always going to work nicely together. I think there's a lot of, especially in these disease communities, a lot of emotion involved. Obviously, a lot of grief. We're all extremely dealing with high emotional, stress-filled lives. But surround yourself with people that think like you do, and try and keep some of the negativity to the side. If there is a way that you can maybe mend those bridges and be that bridge, then I would encourage you to do so. That's at least our experience. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it comes down to the same as doing a for-profit partnership deal, right? So you need to find a champion. So if you're talking to a nameless, faceless sort of group, and the group has a bunch of concerns about the issue, you're never going to be able to unravel that knot. But if you come out and say, this is clearly what we're looking for, this is why we believe there's benefit here, and you can find that individual, now it's not an organization, right? Now it's not this nameless, faceless, but there's an individual who says, actually, you know what, Bill, that makes sense. That's something that we can work on. That's the first step. Now you can share your story. And then the second thing is being very, very transparent, right? So you have to list down, It doesn't need to be a great big complicated, actually probably shouldn't be a great big complicated document. But if you have a very quick list of this is what we're looking for and this is what we're going to do, and that other champion at this point says, actually that makes sense. That's what we're looking for and this is what we need you to do and this is what we're going to do. Now you have that seed of an agreement. And then, you need to sell that through the rest of the organization.
We're going to wrap it up. I just have one final thought on that. Going back to a comment I made earlier on, never forget what you started, why you started out on that journey through your nonprofit. So if you're going to an organization and you want to fund research together, and they may or may not have a requirement that they are the named organization, go back to why you started your organization in the beginning. If the entire reason was that you wanted to find a viable treatment for that condition, maybe actually that is not such a bad path to take, and it's okay. So anyways, be open to that type of stuff. So, thank you, panelists.